Welcome to this explainer on empathy versus projection, the invisible trap. We'll be basing this on some really fascinating work by Danielle Botti at the Inner Lab. So, have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you were talking to a literal brick wall, even when both of you were genuinely, honestly trying to connect? Well, today, we're looking at the hidden friction that causes massive miscommunication in our relationships. We are going to unpack the fundamental difference between genuine connection and a super common psychological illusion.
Okay, let's dive into this. Think about it for a second. When you try to understand someone, are you actually reading their emotions, or are you just projecting your own? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? Because, let's face it, most of us believe our baseline is highly empathetic. We pride ourselves on it. But according to the deep dive research we're exploring today, there's a massive difference between true empathy and projection, and it all boils down to one absolutely crucial distinction: whose emotional experience is actually driving your understanding of the situation.
Let's start by getting really clear on our terms. Empathy is the genuine ability to understand and connect with the actual emotional experience of another person. And I want to put a huge emphasis on that word, actual. True empathy isn't about guessing. It's actually a lot of work. It requires you to deliberately set aside your own emotional responses, your preconceived assumptions, and your personal agenda so you can accurately observe someone else's unique internal world. It's like wiping the slate totally clean before you try to read what's written there.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict we face every single day. On one hand, we have empathy, which is entirely about understanding their experience. On the other hand, we have projection, which is assuming your experience. Projection happens when you mistakenly assume that others feel exactly the same way you would in a similar situation. The sources point out a fascinating and, honestly, kind of surprising reality. Most people who think they're being empathetic are actually just blindly projecting their own emotional reactions onto the other person, rather than doing the hard work to observe what that person is genuinely feeling.
Which brings us to a very common, very innocent trap. We've all heard the advice, right? Just put yourself in their shoes. It sounds great. But when you really stop and think about it, this advice accidentally centers your own feelings. When you put yourself in their shoes, you're still thinking, well, how would I feel if this happened to me? Rather than validating the other person's reality. It substitutes your emotional baseline for theirs, and that completely misses the mark of true connection.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is where things take a much darker turn. You see, projection isn't always an innocent mistake. We need to pivot for a moment to something much more serious: weaponized projection. While everyday projection is just an accidental roadblock to communication, manipulators actively and intentionally exploit this exact psychological dynamic as a smokescreen for their own benefit. Clinically speaking, weaponized projection is a specific manipulation tactic. It's when someone accuses you of exhibiting the exact behaviors, feelings, or motivations that they are actually guilty of. In this darker context, manipulators use projection as a shield. It allows them to shift the focus entirely away from their own toxic actions and immediately put you on the defensive. It is a highly, highly effective psychological maneuver.
To make this abstract concept instantly recognizable, imagine someone pointing a finger right in your face and yelling, "You're the one being manipulative here." The sources note that, for example, a person who frequently lies might constantly accuse you of being dishonest. Or maybe someone who is secretly trying to control a situation claims that you are the one pulling the strings. It's wild, right? But the moment you start defending yourself against their accusation, they've successfully avoided any accountability for their own actions.
So, how in the world do we protect ourselves from this? From both the innocent misunderstandings of everyday projection and those toxic attacks of weaponized projection? Well, the antidote is something called advanced emotional calibration. This is an empowering, highly advanced skill set that literally rescues you from the trap of projection and allows you to navigate the emotional landscape safely and accurately.
Let's move to how this builds into actionable practice, because this is where the magic happens. Here are the concrete steps for tuning into another person's actual reality instead of just guessing. Step 1, step back. You absolutely must create that vital pause between whatever the stimulus is and your response. Step 2, clear your emotional agenda. You have to intentionally wipe away your assumptions about how they should feel. And step 3, objectively read microsignals. This is where you essentially become an emotional translator.
And what exactly are we looking for in that third step? Well, our source material details these physical microsignals as a highly reliable compass. You want to listen for subtle shifts in vocal tone. Like, does their pitch go up, or do they start speaking faster when they're stressed? Notice changes in breathing patterns, like sudden shallow breaths that might indicate anxiety. Watch for fleeting microexpressions, those tiny flashes across the muscles in the face before someone composes their social mask. And most importantly, look for incongruence between words and energy. If someone says they are fine, but their jaw is tightly clenched and their arms are crossed, their body is broadcasting the absolute truth that their words are trying to hide.
So the crucial point is this: you have to respond to their needs, not yours. Advanced emotional calibration ensures that when you do act, you are responding to what they actually need in that exact moment. Whether that's giving them space, offering comfort, or even providing a direct challenge, you're giving them what they need rather than what you assume they need based on your own emotional reflexes.
Let's quickly contrast the real-world outcomes of these two approaches. When we rely on projection and just assume needs, it breeds conflict, it deepens misunderstanding, and frankly, it leaves us wide open to manipulation. But when we observe needs by utilizing true empathy and advanced calibration, it creates genuine connection, establishes psychological safety, and builds ethical influence. Mastering this distinction is literally the difference between failing to connect in your career and building the absolute bedrock of intimacy in your personal life.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a quiet moment of integration. Just something to chew on. The very next time you find yourself in a heated discussion, or maybe trying to comfort a friend, or even navigating a really complex situation at work, I want you to pause and ask yourself, whose feelings are actually driving your response right now?